The House sitting is resumed and the House and Committee is considering the Electronic Identity Verification Bill, and the question is that Part 3 stand part. Honourable Ruth Dyson.
Mr Chairman, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak, as you said, on Part 3 of the Electronic Identity Verification Bill. This is one of two bills that the House will be considering during the course of the evening relating to very similar activities. But, Mr Speaker, I just want to draw your attention to the fact that over the dinner break, there's always interesting conversations, aren't there, that occur over the dinner break. But over the dinner break this evening, there were several conversations happening at the table that I was at. My friend and colleague Chris Farfoy was talking about his children and referred to one of them by his nickname Freddie. And at the other side of the table, Annette King was listening to this conversation but misunderstood the conversation, thinking we were talking about Freddie Mercury, and then started talking about how fabulous Queen were. And then somebody else in another part of the table thought we were talking about the royal visit. So it just, it actually was quite confusing, and it brought us. I can see that the Minister's very intrigued by this. It brought us to the point of saying how important clarity of identification is, which is actually the very point of this legislation, to ensure
we got there, that's the main thing.
Well, you know, elaboration can sometimes be of assistance, and I look forward to my neighbour from Canterbury, the Honourable Amy Adams, taking a call in this, I'm sure she'll make a fine contribution in this debate. Mr Chairman, I had the pleasure of chairing the Select Committee, and as you will notice in the Part 3 miscellaneous provisions, despite this, sometimes when you get to miscellaneous provisions, you think, well, there's not a lot left in this bill, but you will notice, Mr Chairman, the House will notice that there are a few quite significant amendments that have been made by the Select Committee. But perhaps more importantly, and I'll speak on this in a later call, perhaps more importantly, this is the only supplementary order paper that I have yet seen tabled in the name of the Minister, the Honourable Chris Tremaine, who hasn't yet taken a call, but I'm sure that the Honourable Amy Adams, who is standing in for him in the meantime, will do a fine job. But the only supplementary order paper is actually to this part of the bill. In Clause 54, which is the first part, in fact, the Select Committee removed that entire original drafting and has replaced it. And that's pretty important to note the specificity of that, given that it's dealing with the Official Information Act. We obviously had concerns about information under the Official Information Act, and we wanted to make sure that the relevant sections that are described in Clause 54 were in fact adhered to, and that's ensuring that there was clarity between the relationship of this Act, the Electronic Identity Verification Bill, and the Official Information Act. And we clarified at the Select Committee that sections 20A to 21A are given precedence by section 52(3)A and B of the Official Information Act. Part B of the new Clause 54 states that section 39(3)B1 incorporates by reference provisions of the Official Information Act, and Part C of the new Clause 54 says that section 48(2) extends the application of the Official Information Act. So, Mr Speaker, that was quite a significant change, and as I said, when you often get to miscellaneous provisions in the bill, you think, well, that's not going to be arousing much of a debate, but we did have a lot of discussion about this at Select Committee, and as I say, the Minister's only supplementary order paper is referenced through this section. Likewise, in the next clause, Clause 55, we replaced points 1 and 2 of this to ensure that it was really clear about the relationship between this current bill, soon to be an Act, I hope, and the privacy legislation. Mr Speaker, of course we had a lot of discussion about the privacy legislation that was discussed much more than the Official Information Act. There have been a lot of concerns expressed in this House about use and abuse or potential abuse of the privacy legislation. I remember the Minister of Social Development, who some time ago was attacked, or her policy was attacked in the paper by two women who were on the domestic purposes benefit, who had been in receipt of the training incentive allowance and were undertaking university qualifications. That's a jolly fine thing, Mr Chairman.
Honourable Ruth Tyson.
That's a jolly fine thing for anyone to aspire to, but particularly women who are trying to raise a child on their own. For them to be able to do that, take that additional leap is a big thing, and we should support it as a parliament and as a society. They dared to criticise the minister's policy, which was to reduce the application of the training incentive allowance so it didn't cover the very qualifications that they were going through. And at that time, Paula Bennett released their private details. Now, it wasn't a leak. She was very open about the fact that she released their private details, but what was of concern to me, and I know many others, was whether it was actually a breach of the particular woman's privacy when those details were released, whether it had application under the Privacy Act. And so a proceeding was taken under the human rights legislation. Paula Bennett wrote to them about this issue and said, "I acknowledge that you consider that I was wrong to do so and that this resulted in a breach of Ms Fuller's privacy. As you also know, I don't accept that view." So you can see, Mr Chairman, in that example of actions in relation to one's individual privacy, that people have very different views about what is acceptable and what is not. I heard in the previous contribution prior to the dinner adjournment my colleague Dr David Clark from Dunedin North talking about the breaches of privacy through mistakes made by staff, and often because of electronic transfer of information. The IRD mistakes. Thousands and thousands of New Zealanders have had their personal information transferred electronically to the wrong person by IRD. In the last year, IRD has sent the personal information of 6,300 people to the wrong people. That's a huge number of people. So when we're talking about, under this legislation, people giving authority for their information to be accessed by them or by other departments to perhaps be shared, these are the sorts of concerns that we have to be really aware of, and we have to be very rigorous as a parliament to ensure that the concerns that have been expressed in relation to work and income breaches, not only when the minister so boldly defied the human rights proceedings deliberation, but of course more recently with the work and income kiosk shambles, where despite repeated warnings, work and income continued to leave vulnerable people at risk of having their personal information accessed, and the incidents I have just referred to in terms of IRD and them releasing personal information. Those are the issues that have to be paramount in our consideration as we work through Part 3 of this legislation. Mr Chairman, the final point I want to make is in relation to offences and penalties. It is really clear that that our Select Committee, from its consideration, considered that there should be no tolerance of breaches of the provisions here. And of course, if people are a little anxious about an electronic transfer system but see a conviction under it and some appropriate penalties dealt to, then their confidence in the system will increase. I would prefer that there were no breaches of access to identification at all, but certainly if there is, whether they're by accident or willing, then we must have appropriate provisions, and clauses 56 through to 61 cover those offences, and there were very little alterations that the Select Committee made to that. The next section of Part 3 deals with liability, and once again you'll see, Mr Chairman, that the Select Committee made some significant changes. They were more technical than policy driven in that area. The protection from liability clause 1 under section 61 has been replaced, but that was not a significant policy area at all. And the remaining sections of Part 3 deal with regulations. Mr Chairman, I look forward to, as I said, the Minister who's in the chair making a contribution to this debate. It has been a bit of work that the Select Committee undertook. First of all, being a bit puzzled about why we had two bills with such similar names, which appeared on the face of it to do quite, Mr Chairman.
I'm going to give Dennis Rourke a call.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. As I've already said, New Zealand First supports the bill overall.